Good evening. Welcome. Daf Lamed Zayin and as well Daf Lamed Ches and Aleph. Let's get started. Yesterday we learned a Mishnah in the middle of Lamed Vav and Beis that spoke about a number of issues that were Yisurei Derabanan on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and they weren't all categorical Yisurei Derabanan. Some of them were rishus. They were mitzvos that one can do but you're not obligated to do, and also some formal proper mitzvos that you just simply cannot do. And the Gemara is going to continue detailing some of those. We're on the top of Lamed Zayin Amid Aleph, and we are on the top line. Lo choltzen v'lo miyabmin. One cannot do chalitza and one cannot do yibum. So says the Gemara, v'ha mitzvah ka'avid. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa. It's a pasuk in Chumash. They're psukim in Chumash. Says the Gemara, lo tzricha di'ika gadol, where there's a sibling older than you. U'mitzvah begadol yabim. This we'll learn about. This is our next major Maseches, Maseches Yibamos. A lot of the smaller ones for the next few months, and then we'll jump into the larger, terrifying Masechta of Maseches Yibamos. I've never learned it. I don't know how terrifying it is, but everybody says you should be terrified. So thank you, David. Thank you very much. So that's what the Gemara says, is that we're talking about a case scenario where you're not the oldest brother, and under those circumstances, a mitzvah be begadol yabim, and therefore doesn't apply to you. The kulu taimamai. Why are there restrictions on all of these? After all, some of these are mitzvos. Mitzvos are wonderful things. Why would we not allow one to do these mitzvos on Shabbos? Who cares if it's Shabbos? Why can't you do these mitzvos? It's very. So the Gemara gives a blanket answer. Fourth line. We're afraid that somebody may come to write. Just Rashi paints a little bit of a richer picture here. The fourth line of Rashi, Dibur Hamaschel Shem Yichtov, we're concerned about in regards to a psak din l'dayan, and that maybe someone will write down a psak din, ushtar erisin l'kedushin, that you might write down a shtar erisin for someone who's getting married, ushtar chalitza l'choletzes, uksuba liyavama, all of the various scenarios that may lead one to write. Those are the concerns that we have, and that brings us to the two dots on the fourth line. Ve'elu hey mishum mitzvah, we said that there's a case scenario in the Mishnah of something that is taka mitzvah that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Lo makdishim, lo ma'arichim, lo macharimin. These are all various forms of making financial or property commitments to the Beis HaMikdash. This you can't do either. Why not? Gzeira mishum mekach umemkar. There we're concerned about the overarching world of mekach umemkar. And that is why that is not allowed. I should have mentioned a little earlier in the previous section of the Gemara with that Rashi, that the reason why we don't allow for weddings to take place is because of the writing. Theoretically speaking, if a person were to get married on Shabbos, is it chal? The answer is yes, of course. It's a rabbinic injunction that you should not, but the mechanics of getting married actually work. And of course, we've all heard the stories of the kids. It's happened. I've shared the story before, the Harat Mekudesh Shasli cases where somebody hands something else, an item, all those kinds of things happen. But we typically do avoid them because of mekach umemkar. A lot of shilas in halacha. Let's say you have the non-from cousin and they're getting married on Saturday afternoon. Are you allowed to partake in it? Is it marasayan? Good shilas to ask. 5 lines down, the Gemara says, in regards to the cases of below magbi and trumos and maestros, the Mishnah says you're not allowed to do trumos and maestros on Shabbos and Yom Tov. That we know. Pshita. So says the Gemara, Mechudash answer, Tani Rav Yosef, Lo nitzracha ela litnam lekohen babayom. We're talking about doing so on the day of, where it doesn't really appear, Rashi highlights, it's not nikar that you're actually doing any separations. You're not actually solving the problem of tevel. You're just giving food to a kohen. It's a little hard to tell exactly what you're doing. And that's what the Gemara was coming to exclude, that that's not allowed. We're talking about food that was tevel from yesterday. If there is a food that became tevel today, kigon, for example, isa, today, it's Yom Tov. You want to make challah today. So that the Gemara says you're allowed to do. And when does it become tevel? Only when it becomes dough. So the Meforshim here explain as follows. It's correct that normally we would require all of the tithing to be done prior to the holiday. However, here it's Yom Tov, and on Yom Tov you're allowed to have fresh bread. And because you're allowed to have fresh bread, you can make fresh bread, and therefore you can make dough, and only then does it become tevel, and then you can give that to the kohen. And therefore the Gemara says, Mafreshinan v'yahavinan lekohen, that is considered to be something that you are allowed to separate and then give to the kohen. So then the Gemara asks the following question: V'hani mishum rishus ika mishum shvus leka. When we spoke about this area in halacha, that there are things that are a rishus, like someone sitting in a bezdin, which we said that's a rishus. Isn't that also an iser derabanan of gzeir shem yichtov? And not only that, v'hani mishum mitzvah ika mishum shvus leka. Even the ones that are mitzvos, but they have formally suri derabanan attached to them. Why did the Mishnah refer to them in isolation? This is a mitzvah. This is a rishus. They're not. They have a dual personality to them. They're a mitzvah and an isser derabanan on Shabbos. So why do we have this strange isolated formulation of this is a mitzvah and this is a rishus? Amar Rav Yitzchak lo miboya kamar. The Gemara is just coming to tell you from the obvious to the less obvious. Lo miboya shvus gredasa de aser. I don't need you to tell me that a shvus and isser derabanan, a rabbinic injunction, is not allowed. That's for sure. Ella afilu shvus de rishus nami aser. But even a rabbinic injunction on that which is a mitzvah, but it's like a mitzvah kiyumis. You don't have to do it, but you can do it, right? So even there, we would have a rabbinic injunction. And then the next level, third of the way down, 3 lines before the wide lines, I don't need you to tell me shvus to rishus to aser. I don't need you to tell me about a case where there's a rabbinic injunction on a rishus, like again, that case of sitting in bezdin to aser. That's for sure true. Ela afilu shvus to mitzvah, even if there's an isser derabanan that accompanies a mitzvah nami aser, that's also not allowed. This is really more about semantics, about how we refer to it. But in short, the types of things that our Mishnah is restricting do have that duality to them, that they are possibly even a mitzvah, but afal pikein, they are not allowed. This also gets into some of the blurry lines of halacha about wearing tefillin. It's a mitzvah to wear tefillin, but we don't wear them on Chol Hamoed. So that's a huge shaila in poskim, as we're all familiar with. Rabbi Friedman is very makbid that those who don't have a formal minhag should put on tefillin without a bracha. That's my minhag. We do that. It's very hard. You have to tell yourself, don't make a bracha, don't make a bracha, don't make a bracha, because we're the muscle memory. But that is the ideal, preferably if possible. If one has a specific masorah, then that's understandable. But we could understand from the world of tefillin and Chol Hamoed how sometimes we have a mitzvah that intersects with a holiday that we therefore have these challenges. And the Gemara stated a number of blot ago, if you find your tefillin outdoors on Shabbos, you can wear them in zug. You can wear them in one pair at a time to bring them back in. All of that is permissible. First of the last of the very short lines, Kol Elu b'Yom Tov Amru. This is the end of the Mishnah. And the Gemara here, according to the Hagos V'Tzionim, adds in the line that's missing from the quote of our Mishnah. We see within the 2 dots, all it says is Kol Elu b'Yom Tov Amru. Really what it should have quoted is the last line of the Mishnah that we have on Lamed Vav Amud Beis of Ein Ben Shabbos L'Yom Tov Ela Ochel Nefesh Bilvad. And the Gemara says there's no difference. That's what the Mishnah says, that there's no difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov except for Ochel Nefesh. But the Gemara has a very hard time with that. Reminhu, we have other sources in halacha that are not that way. Look no further than the very title of our parak. It's parak Meshilin. Or Minhu, we have a question against our Mishnah from a Mishnah in the beginning of this parak. What did we learn? We see that one is allowed to lower fruit that is about to get wet on the roof. You're drying out grains, whatever it is on the roof. You're drying it out. I'm afraid that it's going to get wet. The storm is coming. So we said on Yom Tov, you're allowed to lower it, but on Shabbos, you're not. But you just said, Ein Bein Shabbos Yom Tov, that there's no difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov with the exception of Meleches Ochel Nefesh. So, but the Mishnah at the beginning of Parak Mashilin shows that that's not true. So now we have 2 worlds. We have a strict world and a more lenient world. The strict world says, done. That which is not allowed on Yom Tov is not allowed on Shabbos, done. And the other side says, no, you're allowed to lower fruits on Yom Tov, but not on Shabbos. So that's a machloket. That's a stira, I should say. How do we solve that problem? So we'll see 2 different approaches in the Gemara. Here's approach number 1. Amar Rav Yosef, 3rd century, Amora Lokasha. This is not a problem. This is just a machloket in the Tanaim. Ha, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yehoshua, and we'll see. We know that we have our Mishnah, which is strict, and we have the Mishnah in Meshilin, in the beginning of the parak, which is lenient. So let's see how this plays out. Titania, halfway down, Oso ve'espeno shenaflu lebor. Oso ve'espeno lo sishchatu b'yom echad. It's a pasuk in Chumash. The halacha is that one is not allowed to shech an animal and its child in the same day. It's Oso ve'espeno lo sishchatu b'yom echad. So this is sometimes hard to control when you're shechting many, many, many animals at once. You have to know, if you are the owner of animals, you have to know which animals are parents and children. You got to color code them. I don't know, whatever. You got to put names on them. Lucy and Lucy's child. You have to know because you're not allowed to shech them up together. So that's key to understanding this Gemara. So what's the Gemara say? The Gemara says in this Beitzah that Oso ve'espeno, the parent and the child, shenaflu lebor, they both fell into a pit on Yom Tov. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, how do we solve this problem? Ma'ale es harishon amanas l'shochto v'shochto. It's Yom Tov, so you're allowed to take out one of them, and then you can shecht it. The problem is that because you shechted this first animal that you took out, you cannot shech the next animal. So what does Rabbi Eliezer say you do with the next animal? So Rabbi Eliezer says, you feed the animal where it is. You give it enough food to make sure it can last the course of Yom Tov, so that the animal should not die. That's the strict version of Rabbi Eliezer. However, Rabbi Yoshua is more lenient in this case, where the mother and child animals fall into the pit. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Males Harishon Amanas L'Shochto. You take out one animal. In your mind, it's a ha'arama. You're gonna be trying to pull a little loophole here. So it says the Gemara, you bring out the first one with on the condition to shecht it, and then ve'eno shecht, and you don't shecht it, and then the remaining animal v'chozer umari mumale hasheni, and then you can go and take out the second animal. And rotza zeh shochet. So the ha'arama is the loophole that you're using here, or as the art school refers to it as subterfuge. What you're using over here is that. I'm going to take out the first animal. You know what? Now that I took it out, I don't want to shecht it. Okay, fine. Let me take out the second animal and see what it looks like. So what we're doing is we're employing the logic of I might shecht this animal, and this is the lenient side where we allow for the loopholes. And what the Gemara is assuming with this Beitzah is that it matches up to our two sources as follows. Our Mishnah on Lamed Vav Amid Beis, which is pretty categorical, of the Ein Bain. There's no differences at all between Shabbos and Yom Tov. That's like the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. We don't make any leniencies for financial loss. So the animal, we just don't make any, we're not using loopholes. We're staying the way things are. That's our Mishnah. Mashein came the sheet of Rabbi Yoshua, which is more flexible, does look at financial loss. We are afraid to some degree that the animal might die. And therefore, because we're concerned about financial loss, that's the Mishnah in the beginning of Perek Meshilin, where we do allow for the lowering of fruits that are on the roof so that they don't get ruined. And that is how the Gemara pairs up these two sources, our Mishnah and the Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek, in accordance with the Shittas of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua in regards to the case of Oso ve'Espino. But the Gemara doesn't like this. Amalei Abaye. Abaye was a Talmud, as we know, of Rav Yosef, 4th century Amora. And he says, Mimai, how do you know that you can compare the Bryce of Oso ve'Espino to our conflicting sources in the Tanaim of our Mishnah here and the Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek? Dilma, perhaps. Ad Khan, maybe here in the case of Oso ve'Espino, where the mother and child fall into the pit together, Loka Amar Eliezer Hasam, Ela de'efshar beparnasa. Well, there, in the case of the animals that had fallen into the pit, well, yes, you can take one out and shecht it, that's no problem. But the only reason why he's saying that you're not allowed to do anything for financial loss is because you could feed the animal, no problem at all. Aval, hacha, in regards to the food that's on the roof, the lo efshar beparnasa, there's no way to protect that. You can't. There's no feeding of food. You just have to take it off the roof. Lo, he wouldn't have been as strict. So we don't necessarily have a good answer from Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua to the world of our Mishnah and the Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek. And a second reason as to why this case of Oso ve'Espino is not such a good argument is as follows: 2/3 of the way down, halfway through the wide lines. Inami, Adkan lo ka'amar Rabbi Yoshua Hasam. The only time Rabbi Yoshua was lenient in the case of Oso ve'Espino to say we can use a ha'arama, a loophole, to take out both animals was ela de'efshar le'arume, because there I had a way to do a ha'arama. However, abal hacha de lo efshar le'arume, but here with the fruit with the grains that are on the roof, I have no way of using a loophole. There's no loophole. I'm not using the food now anyways. There's no loopholes to be had. So maybe he wouldn't have been so lenient like he was over here. He would have been strict. So therefore, we can't compare. So now we need another answer. Our question is back to where we started. Again, our Mishnah here on Lamed Vav is a Mishnah that's very strict. Ein bein Shabbos le'yom tov ela meleches zochel nefesh bilvad. However, the Mishnah at the beginning of Perek Meshilin says that you are allowed to lower things on Yom Tov, but not on Shabbos. So that's a stira. So now let's see answer number 2, 10 lines or so from the bottom. That Ella Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa says lo kashya ha beis Shammai and ha beis Hillel. That maybe the distinction between the Ein Bain Mishnah and the Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek that's lenient by Yom Tov but strict by Shabbos, maybe that is party lines with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. That's not. The Mishnah writes, and we've seen this before. Beis Shammai omrim ein motziin lo as hakatan v'lo as halula v'lo as sefer Torah l'rishus harabim. Rabbi, this is Beis Hillel. This is Beis Shammai, who's very strict, and he would align with the Mishnah here on Lamed Vav of the Ein Bains. Beis Hillel matir, and on Yom Tov we see that he would allow this that Beis Hillel would allow this kind of carrying on Yom Tov. So if Beis Hillel allows it, we see that there are things he allows on Yom Tov and not on Shabbos, and that aligns perfectly with the Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek of Meshilin Derech Aruba. So says the Gemara, maybe we have our correlated answer, and the Gemara responds, Dilma lohi, maybe not. Ad kan lo ka'amre Beis Shammai. Maybe the only reason why Beis Shammai is strict over there is because Sorry, I lost my line here. Dilma lohi ad kan lo ka'amar lo ka'amre beis shamai hasam ela ahotza. There he's only concerned about hotza because he has some degree of concern about carrying. Aval atiltul lo, but there maybe we should not be concerned about muksa. Who says muksa would be a problem? Maybe he would allow for the lowering of the fruits through the roof. Says the Gemara, what kind of argument is that? The whole concern about tiltul, about muksa, the whole concern is about carrying. That's what some of the Rishonim write, and that's what the Gemara says here. Atu tiltul lav tzarach hotzahu. You're trying to make you're splitting the hairs of saying no. Beis Shammai was only concerned about hotzah, about carrying in the tchum, where there's still a tchum there's still a degree of tchum by the world of Yom Tov. That's what we were concerned about. Masha'en Kain, by tiltul, maybe we shouldn't be concerned. And says the Gemara, what are you talking about? The whole concern of hotzah, the whole concern of tiltul is to prevent hotzah. So therefore, you cannot separate them. Atu tiltul lav tzarach hotzahu. It's a rhetorical question with a question mark right at the end of this sugya, and it ends right at the Mishnah, saying that we actually do in fact have our match. So let's just review the conclusion. Our Mishnah here on Lamed Vav says, Ein bein Shabbos liyom tov melecha sochel nefesh bilvad. But the Mishnah at the beginning of the parak indicated that there is a difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov, and therefore, how do we understand this contradiction? The Gemara answers, it's party lines, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and it correlates just fine. That brings us to a new Mishnah. This new Mishnah and the sugya that ensues is all about Tchum Shabbos. We know that a person is allowed to have only up to 2,000 amos from the place that they are kona shvisa. Kona shvisa is the language of establishing your place. So once you do that, that's great. What happens if you have two people who are kona shvisa and they're trying to share an item? So then if you could imagine Venn diagrams, right? The two intersecting circles. So I have a circle of my 2,000 amos and you have a circle of your 2,000 amos. If they overlap, so then can we share something in the space that overlaps? So that's going to be in part what our Mishnah is talking about. Let's get started with the Mishnah, 6 lines from the bottom, Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. When we're talking about animals, when we're talking about utensils, that's kiragle habaylim. We follow the feet of the owners, namely we follow the tchum of the owners. Whatever their 2,000 amos is, that also applies to their behemoths. This is familiar to us in that we know that we have a shvisas behemah. We have a halacha that an animal is not allowed to do malacha on your behalf. And even though we paskin that tchumen on Shabbos is the rabbanon, afal pikein, we still have a restriction that your animals cannot leave the tchum on Shabbos. So if you have a dog, it doesn't really apply here. The tchum is outside the city limits. But if you had a dog and you lived at the city limits, so sometimes when I do these brisses in the middle of godforsaken places, the community is literally like an oblong shape or like an amoeba-shaped community, but it's completely encased in the middle of nowhere. It's where they film movies, like the terrifying movies. And if you go from the city limits 2,000, you cannot let your dog run free there because he has the same isser of Tchum Shabbos as you do, and he doesn't know the difference. You can have a very long leash. It's a 3,500 foot leash. That's pretty expensive, but it would probably do the job. So says the Gemara, the Mishnah, when it comes to your animals, to your utensils, they have the same halachic status as you do as it relates to Tchum Shabbos. Let's say I give my animal either to a child or to a shepherd, they're just an extension of you, and they have to follow your rules of Tchum Shabbos. Let's say there are a number of brothers, and I have a kli. It's not one that I share. It's my kli. Everybody knows it's mine, and you can't have it. So then that's fine. Then that kli, that animal, follows specifically that sibling, so it's Phil's. So then it's done. It's my Tchum Shabbos. It's not my sibling's Tchum Shabbos. And if it's a kli that everyone uses in the house, whatever that may be, I don't know. You got to pick a kli that's totally neutral. So then, whatever that is, let's say something that isn't muksa, but the equivalent of an iPad that the family uses, right? Spoons. You take a spoon. Whatever the halacha is that it has to be tethered with a 2,000 amma max. When it's not specific, it's the place that is common to everyone in the house. That's the Venn diagram, the overlapping Venn diagram. And then what about borrowing? 3 lines from the bottom. If a person borrows a kli from their friend on Yom Tov, kiragle hashoel, then that is true. It's a me'erev Yom Tov specifically, right? So it's 5 minutes before Shkia. I come over and I say, can I please borrow a pot to cook food? And you say, sure, no problem. And I bring it home. So then it's as if it's mine, kiragle hashoel, and it's like the borrower. However, b'yom tov, if I come to your house on Yom Tov, and then I say, hey, can I borrow a pot to cook something? That's allowed. However, because it was b'yom tov, it's kiragle hamashil. Then the 2,000 amos is not dependent on you, the borrower, but it's on you, the lender, because it was done after Yom Tov started. We'll see a conflicting shita potentially in the Gemara. V'chein, the last two lines, ha'isha sheshala mechaverta tavlen umayim umelach le'isasa. A woman who borrows from her friend spices and water and salt in order to make dough, hare elu kiragle shtehen, because you did it on Yom Tov, seemingly you are tied together with this person, and whatever her Tchum Shabbos is, it's only the places that are common to both of you. Last line in the Mishnah just qualifies the previous line. Rabbi Yehuda poter b'mayim mipnei she'ein bohen mamish. Water is ein bohen mamish. It's not something that you really look at as a food or as a kli or as something unique by which we would then be trapped by the Venn diagram of her 2,000 amos and mine, and we can only be in a space that doesn't apply to water. Water doesn't have the same guidelines. All right, that brings us to the very last word on Lamed Zayin, and the Gemara says, Masnisin, that our Mishnah, turning to the top of Lamed Zayin and Beis, is the Loki Rabbi Dosa. This is not like the opinion of Rabbi Dosa. Why not? What does Rabbi Dosa hold? Remember what we had said in our Mishnah, that if you take something from Erev Yom Tov, then its guidelines of Tchum Shabbos are based on you. But if you borrow something from someone on Yom Tov, then it has to follow the Tchum Shabbos of the lender. But Rabbi Dosa said something different. Rabbi Dosa Omer, the Amri la Abba Shaul Omer, we're not exactly sure who said it. Halokeach behema mechavero me erev Yom Tov. If a person buys an animal from his friend before Yom Tov, afal pi shelo maser lo el b'Yom Tov, even though, okay, so the purchase was before Yom Tov, but it wasn't delivered to you until Yom Tov itself, harehi kiragle halokech, even though that when Shkia kicked in, you didn't have it in your possession, afal pi we still treat it as kiragle halokech. That's different than our Mishnah. And as well, if a person gives over their animal to a shepherd, you made an agreement before Yom Tov, but if the Masira, the giving over of the animal, is only on Yom Tov, which again is not like our Mishnah, because our Mishnah seemed to have used Shkia as the determining factor. Where is the animal at Shkia? If the animal at Shkia is in the possession of the borrower, great, then the Tchum Shabbos follows you. And if it's in the possession of the lender, then great, then the Tchum Shabbos follows him. But this doesn't seem to work that way. So it says the Gemara 6 lines down on Lamed Zayin and Beitzah, afilu tema Reb Dosa. We could even say that we could make Reb Dosa in this Beitzah, again, it might also be Abba Shaul, whoever the author is, it could even fit like Rabbi Dosa. In one case, we're talking about a scenario where there's only one roa. Where there's only one roa, where there's only one shepherd, so then it's a foregone conclusion as to what you're doing with your animal. There's only one shepherd, and you're going to give the shepherd your animal. So therefore, in the case of which one is it? Yeah, in the case of Reb Dosa, we're going to say it's kiragle haroa. However, kan b'shnei rom, in our Mishnah, it's shnei rom, and therefore it really just depends on where you tachlis, where the animal is when shkia kicks in. And dekanami, this actually is meduyak in our Mishnah, because our Mishnah said dekatani livno o leroa, that it gave two options in our Mishnah, and that's how we know that our Mishnah is talking about two possibilities of where you may give your animal, and therefore the answers are different, but really there's no machlokas. And this must have been something that Rabbi Bar Chana didn't hear. Rabbi Bar Chana was a 3rd century Amora, early 3rd century, late 2nd century, because he was a Talmud of Rav Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rav Yochanan, halacha ki Reb Dosa. What do you mean halacha ki Reb Dosa? First of all, we just said that there's no machlokas. We just answered that our Mishnah is talking about a case where there's 2 roim, and the case of Reb Dosa was talking about a case where there's 1 roa. So strange to start with, but the Gemara goes with a halachic argument and says, how can that be? Miyamar Rav Yochanan hachi. Would Rav Yochanan really be of the opinion? Would Rav Yochanan really be of the opinion that we are talking about the halacha being like Reb Dosa? V'ha'amar Rav Yochanan halacha kistam Mishnah. In general, Rabbi Yochanan says that if you have 2 Tanaic sources that are conflicting with one another, that we always follow the one that's anonymous as opposed to the one that has a name. And our Mishnah is stam. So if our Mishnah is stam and the Bryce is labeled as Reb Dosa or Abba Shaul, then we should pass him like our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, have you been paying attention? That's what we already said. There's no machlokes. V'lavu kimna, did we not already establish kan beroa echad kan b'shnei roim, that in the case of the Bryce of Abba Shaul / Rabbi Dosa, we said that we're dealing over there with only 1 row. In the case of our Mishnah, we're dealing with 2. There's no machlokes bichlal. You can say Rabbi Dosa, you can say Stam Mishnah, doesn't matter. Nobody's arguing. They're just two different cases. And that is how the very strange Gemara. It's very strange that the Gemara wasn't bothered by the fact that we just gave the answer. Nevertheless, that is how the Gemara concludes in this area. We're going to continue this sugya with the following scenario. About a third of the way down on Lamed Zayin and Beis Tanu Rabbanon. Shnaim sheshalu chaluk echad b'shutfus. So you and I borrow a garment. It's raining. And you davened early, right? So you wore the garment on the way to Shachris, and we agreed that I would wear the garment on the way home from Shachris. So we're splitting it today. How does that play out with Tchum Shabbos? So it says the Gemara, in such a case, Zel lelech bo Shachris the Beis HaMedrash. One of them wanted to use it in the morning to go to the Beis Medrash, but Zel lelech bo Arbis the Beis HaMishta, whatever. However, the Gemara point is just highlighting that each of you are splitting the use of this particular garment. Ze irei v'alav letzafon. You set your Eruv to the north. The Ze'irev alav l'darim, and I set my Eruv to the south. Namely, we don't necessarily have a lot of overlapping space of our Eruvin, of our Tchum. So what should we do with the coat? I can only wear it so far, says the Gemara. Zeh she'irev alav l'tzafon, the person who set their Eruv up to the north, Mahalich l'tzafon, yes, you can walk northbound. However, only karaglim she'irev alav l'darim. It's Venn diagram. You can only walk in the space that is equal, that is common to both people, and therefore, yes, you can walk north, but only as far as the person who took his Erev to the south could walk north. And the other way is also true. Mahalech, and then v'zeh she'irev alav l'darim, and the one who made an Erev to the south, he can also be mahalech l'darim. He can also walk toward his home, but only karagli mishe'irev alav l'tzafon. So you're stuck. V'im mitzu esatchum. What if you made the tchumen as far apart as possible and you're still trying to borrow the garment? So says the Gemara, if you stretched out the tchum to the point that there is no Venn diagram, it's two circles that just don't overlap, you're stuck. Unbelievable. Because your garments are so much a part of you and they have the same halachic status as a tchum, so you're stuck. This garment cannot be moved. It has to stay exactly where it is. You will get soaked in the rain and there's nothing you can do about it. And we're exactly halfway down, the last of the short lines, Itmar. Let's talk about a case of Shnaim Shalakhu Chabis Uvehema B'Shutfis. You have two people who took partnership over a barrel of wine and of an animal. Now, a barrel of wine is unique in that you can literally pour out half into another container and take some home for Shabbos. So that can be split up. An animal, less so, until it's shechted. So says the Gemara, how do we treat this partnership of a barrel of wine and an animal as it relates to Tchum Shabbos? So Rav Amar, this is a machlokas. Rav says, Chavis muteres. There's no problem with the chavis. Everyone can take whatever they need. Ubehema asura, but there is a problem with the behema. That's going to be problematic. Ushmuel Amar chavis nami asuri says, no, everything is problematic b'shutfes. We all have all the same halachos as it relates to Tchum Shabbos, and it doesn't matter that there's a behema or that there's a chavis. Now Shmuel's answer is at least consistent across the board, but Rav's is not. So the Gemara asks on Rav, my kasavar Rav, what is Rav's shita? Ika savar yesh breira. If what you're saying is that the reason why the wine is permissible to be parsed out and why there's no concern of Tchum Shabbos, when person A takes his wine home and person B takes his wine home, we don't care about Tchum Shabbos. So that's Breira. We didn't know which molecules of wine was going to be in person A's jug, and we had no idea. It's Breira. He took it now. It's a retroactive decision to before, as though it was already his from before Shabbos. But if you believe in Breira, then afilu behema tishterei. And whenever we cut parts of the animal, the same exact thing should be true. Because over ain Breira. And if you say that Rav is of the opinion that we do not allow for retroactive decision making, if that's true, then afilu chavis nami asura. You can't have it both ways. Rav Shita is very complicated. So the Gemara answers 3 lines into the wide lines. Le'olam, really, Rav holds kasavar yesh breira. Really, he does hold a breira. So that means we understand the case of chavis. What about the animal? The shanya behema deka yanke tchumen mehadade, because the animal benefits from all of the tchumen. They graze everywhere. They don't have a lot of, during the week, they're parts of the different parts of the land. They're all, it's not like so controlled. They're like eating all over the place. So therefore the animal is a little bit different. Amrei le, Rav Kahana v'Rav Asi l'Rav. So here Rav Kahana and Rav Asi ask a question to Rav. They were Talmidim of Rav, 2nd century. And Rav was a 1st century, very early Amor, the earliest of them. I see that you're concerned about tchumen, but I don't see that you're concerned about muksa. Why are you not concerned about muksa when it comes to these case scenarios? So it says the Gemara, Shasik Rav, he didn't respond. And we know that when a person is silent, omission is not always a proof, but sometimes it is. Do we say shtika kehoda damya or shtika lav kehoda damya? The Gemara doesn't give this in this language, but effectively that's what's going on here. We don't know what Rav's silence meant. So the Gemara tries to posit, my have'ala, what taka is the din? What does Rav hold? So Rav Hoshaya Amar Yesh Breira. He really holds that Yesh Breira. But Rav Yochanan Amar Ein Breira. And Rav Yochanan says that there's, so it's a machlokas how to understand Rav. Says the Gemara, you just wanted to say that Rav Hoshia holds of that Yesh Breira, that we allow for retroactive halachic decision making. That's not true. The Gemara says 2/3 of the way down, about 6-7 lines into the Y lines. The Savar of Hoshia Yesh Breira, does he really hold of this principle? We've seen this Mishnah a number of times. The Mishnah writes, Hameis babayis, Rachmana litzlan, a person dies in a house. Below, and in that house, psachim harbe, there are a lot of exits because we don't know which exit the mace will exit through. Therefore, kulan tmein, all of the doorways are exit. All of the doorways are exits. That's true, and all of that which is within the door jamb is going to be considered tameh. So whatever they just imagine a door jamb like this on the outside of the door, but still under the door jamb. If there's a mace, then whatever's under the door jamb will become tameh because we don't know where the mace is going to exit from. That's the basic din of the Mishnah. Now, niftach echad mehen. If when you saw the person was about to die, you opened one of the doors, clearly indicating where you planned on taking the mace out of the house, so then hu tameh v'chulan tahor. Then only that doorway would be tameh, and you got a newspaper under there, whatever you have under there, that all becomes tameh. Chishev lehotzio be'echad mehen. What if you only thought about it? You knew the person was going to die. In your head, you're like front door, back door, right? So you decided in your head, or through a window, or through a window that has 4x4, that at least that amount of size, which we assume is the minimal amount of size to bring a mace out of a house. That's not very big. 4x4 tefachim. What is that? 16 inches. That's tiny. That's dead, though. It's not like you still. You're already putting them through a window is bad enough. But it's time. I'm just saying, you're talking about a very small human being. 16 inches is less than the span of my hands. They have a skeleton. It's not just push them through. It's not like a mice that they can, the size of a quarter. Maybe we should take them swimming. So the Gemara says that this, if a person is chishev, if you thought about that door, then that actually helps a lot. That works. Kulan, then that prevents all of the other doors from becoming tameh. Beis Shammai says, you have to think about it before the person dies. Beis Hillel and Beis Hillel says you can't think about it after you can even think about it after he dies, and that will be sufficient. Itmar Allah, and here's where we get back to what we said. Remember, we had said earlier that Rav Hoshia had said that he held a brera. So says the Gemara, what does Rav Hoshia say about this case? Itmar Allah, Amar Rav Hoshia, the taras apsachim ikanu lahaba. Even according to Beis Hillel, when Beis Hillel says that you thought about which door you were going to take the mace out of, even after he died, okay, so now that you thought about it, now what? So Rav Hoshaya looks at the Shita of Beis Hillel and says, he doesn't mean retroactively. He just means mikanu lehaba. So let's say the mace dies at 9:01, and you're chishev, you decide at 9:10 that you're going to take the mace out of door X. So okay, so everything that was there up until 9:10 is going to be tameh. That's what Rav Hoshia says, which shows that he doesn't hold a brera. Because if he held a brera, then we would retroactively take that door and go back to the time to prior of the death and say that there should be no tumah. So we see that Rav Hoshia doesn't hold a brera. So answers the Gemara, you're absolutely right. 6 lines from the bottom on Lamed Zayin and Beis Epoch, we need to reverse the shitas. Really, Rav Hoshia did not say yesh brera. Really, Amar ein brera. The Rav Yochanan Amar yesh brera. We got the shitas wrong, and really, we're not sure what Rav said, machlokas, but basically Rav Yochanan is the one who says yesh brera. Says the Gemara, that can't be either. Umi islay the Rav Yochanan brera. Rav Yochanan doesn't hold a brera. The Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rav Yochanan. Rav Asi says in the name of Rav Yochanan, Ha'achin shechilku lekuchosein. If there are brothers who are taking an inheritance upon the patira of their father, so then in that case, lekuchosein, they're considered to be purchasers of the property. Lamay nafkamina umachzirin zelo zebi yovel. Wow. That's right. The pasuk says in Chumash that when it comes to Yovel, Ishel nishpachto tashubu, all the houses have to go back to where they came from. So if you treat the brothers and their inheritance as a halachic Yerusha mamish, okay, then nothing goes back at the Yovel. But if in fact we treat them as lekuchos, as though they're buyers of the home of their father, then everything has to go back at the beginning of the cycle. At the end of the Yovel cycle, they all have to go back and look at the house again, reassess the cost of the house, and divide and conquer financially. You're not going to cut the house in half. So if you want to say, and therefore we have a question against Rav Yochanan, because this shows that Rav Yochanan does not hold of Breira, because if you would have held it Breira, then we wouldn't have said you have to give it back at Yovel. The Chitema, if you want to say that the way to get out of this is that Kiles Leila Rav Yochanan Breira B'Deoraisa, really Mideoraisa Rav Yochanan doesn't hold the Breira Aval B'Derabbanan Islay, and really he does hold it. That would solve the problem, because there at least we have some scenario in which Rav Yochanan holds the Breira. Says the Gemara, that's not true either. Uviderabanan, even with Dine Derabanan, Mi Islay. Does Rav Yochanan even hold of Breira by Dine Derabanan? The Hatani, we learned in a Beitzah. Ayo taught us, we've learned this person's name before. He's a Tana. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he taught us, Ein Adam Masne al Shnei Dvarim Ke'echad, that when it comes to placing an Eruv, that one is not allowed to make a double condition. So you're allowed to have some type of condition from before Shabbos. You put up 2 Eruvin. You don't know where the Talmud Chacham is coming from to give shiur. He might be coming from the east. He might be coming from the west. Once the Talmud Chacham shows up on Shabbos, that's your Eruvin. You can't benefit from both Eruvin. So, but you can't say I get to go get 2,000 to the east and 2,000 to the west. You got to pick one. So as we turn to the top of Daf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, v'havinan ba, when we analyze this, ma'ishna lekanu lekan delo. What's the reason why that you can't have both 2,000 amos to the east and 2,000 amos to the left? Because that's the ein breira, because he doesn't hold a breira. So therefore, mizrach umarav nami ein breira. So therefore, it seems that even by a din derabanan, there's no breira. Amar Rav Yochanan ukvar ba chacham. He says the way that we understand this sugya is that really the chacham showed up before Shabbos. You just didn't know that. But had you known, then it would have been an Isser Derabanan. We don't allow for that. So we see that even by Din Derabanan, he doesn't hold of that. Alma les le Rav Yochanan Breira. Question is back as it started, which is that we don't know who holds Yesh Breira or Ein Breira. Is it Rav Hoshia or is it Rav Yochanan? So says the Gemara, Ela la'olam, 4th line, lo tepuch, don't switch the sheet. It's really Rav Hoshia was the one who holds Yesh Breira, and Rav Yochanan holds Ein Breira. V'chiles leila Rav Hoshia Breira. This answer we can give for Rav Hoshia, which is that B'Deoraisa. He says that B'Deoraisa aval B'Derabanan islay. Mideoraisa Rav Hoshia holds that there is no Breira at all. But Midirabanan, he does hold the Breira, and that actually works. So now this is a little nuanced and confusing, but I'll just summarize. We were a little concerned about what Rav held. And it seems from the Gemara that Rav, within the world of Rav Hoshia, holds that yes, we do have Breira, but only B'dinei Derabanan and not B'dinei Deoraisa. Dorash Mar Zutra, halachic Rav Hoshia, and Rav Hoshia was right. So that's seemingly, again, if we were post-game and we had the paskin from the Gemara, it would seem that we would hold that Mideoraisa, there's no such thing as Breira, but Midirabanan, there is such thing as Breira. And one last sugya that's connected but doesn't flow with the Shakla Bataria, 6th line down on Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, Amar Shmuel Shor Shel Patem. A Patem is a person who fattens animals. Harehu Keragle Kol Adam. It belongs to the person who owns it. Shor Shel Roa, that of a shepherd. Harehu Keragle Oso Ha'ir. It's like the ones who live in the city. And that brings us to the 2 dots, about a third of the way down. We're just going to go a few more lines and then we'll stop for the day. We said that if a person borrows a kli from before Yom Tov, that it belongs to him. And the Gemara says that's obvious. We know that a shol is chayiv, even is a very high standard of shmira. So of course it's going to be his, to the point that we would assume Tchum Shabbos is based on him. That's obvious. Pshita. So answers the Gemara, lo tzricha shelo masr lo ela b'Yom Tov. No. He borrowed it. He did whatever kinyan that he did from before the holiday began, but it only showed up at his house after Tzeis happened. So that's the case that we had to create as a chiddush, that works. And the next case the Gemara presents is, then the Gemara explains, Ma'udetema la birshuse ukmei. We would have said that at Shkia it wasn't in his property, Kamash Malan, that we consider it in his property at that time because the kinyan was already done for for the she'ela, for the borrowing. This also works out for Rav Yochanan. The Amar Rav Yochanan, Hashol kli mechaver me'erev Yom Tov, af al pi shelo nasna lo b'yom tov, shelo nasna lo ela b'yom tov, even though he only received it on Yom Tov, harehu keragle hashoel. It's as if it belongs to the shoel. So as long as your kinyan took place beforehand, you're good to go. And then we follow your tchum and not the tchum of the mashil of the lender. Last little sugya for the night. B'yom Tov keragle hamashil. We said that if a person borrows something on Yom Tov, then it's as if it belongs to the lender. Says the Gemara, very good. Pshita, the whole transaction started on Yom Tov. Of course, that should be the case, that it's not the tchum of the borrower, but rather the tchum of the lender. Lo tzricha deragil v'sha'il minei. No, every year he borrows from this guy. Every single year, it's that guy, it's that neighbor who constantly knocks on your door. Hey, I'm back again. And it's understood that you're going to borrow from him. So says the Gemara, Ma'u detema, you might have thought, Birshuse kamokimle, that we treat it as though it's in his property, even though he has yet to borrow it, because he has a chazaka, as it were, to borrow. Kamash malan, that we do not apply a chazaka in this case at all. Meimar amar, we would argue, Dilma mishkach inishacharina. Maybe he'll find somebody else to borrow from. V'azil v'shalmine, he'll borrow from another person. So you might have had a havamina that because you're a regular to borrow, therefore we assume that you're going to borrow again. And the Gemara says absolutely not. Until you actually borrow, nothing to talk about. If you are going to be joining for the Siyum, please send things in before Shabbos just so I can have a proper count. And I will ensure that all of the food shows up here on time. Wishing you all a beautiful Shabbos.